Good afternoon. My name is Brian Wheeler, Director of Communications for the City of Charlottesville. Welcome to Cville360, a program to inform and engage the Charlottesville community. During the coronavirus pandemic, the city's leadership knows you want to hear from us frequently about our actions. We also want to hear from you and provide opportunities for engagement. We've launched this program on our streaming sites, Comcast Channel 10, and on a companion Zoom webinar so you can tune in live and on demand while practicing social distancing. The webinar allows you to join the broadcast and ask questions of our guest. If you want to try the webinar, visit charlottesville.org/Zoom for the registration information. There's a link to each show at the bottom of the page. At the top of each show, we're going to have a brief update on the state of the coronavirus and the city's response from the city's fire chief, Andrew Baxter, who will join us today via webinar. After the chief's update, the remainder of the program today will focus on the impact of the coronavirus on local business and the support being offered by the city and other resource providers. In the studio, we will have Chris Engel, the city's Economic Development Director, and via webinar, we'll have Stephen Davis of the Community Investment Collaborative and City Councilor Lloyd Snook. Let me show you what our panelists look like on the webinar. And good, we've got video from all of them. That's great. And first we're going to start off, as I mentioned, with Chief Baxter. And Chief, if you could go ahead and give the community an update on our response to the coronavirus, that'd be great.
Sure, Brian. So we just received updated numbers this afternoon from the Thomas Jefferson Health District, BDH, and we're at 68 confirmed COVID-19 cases in the Thomas Jefferson Health District, and that includes 32, in Albemarle County and 16 in the city of Charlottesville. So we continue to see a growth in the number of diagnosed cases. Our strategic goals have not changed. We're focused as the city on providing essential services. We're focused on identifying and protecting our vulnerable populations and also our first responders, and then also doing what we can to help flatten the curve to sustain the health system. We've taken a number of steps that are continuing today, and we're continuing to refine those things. Our 911 call center, the Emergency Communications Center, is doing call screening to try and serve as sort of a first filter for COVID patients or patients that are symptomatic. People may have seen a series of PSAs on social media from the fire department and the police department, encouraging people to use 911 for emergencies and trying to help people figure out when is an appropriate time to call their healthcare provider versus calling 911. We're continuing to refine and modify our response procedures, and that includes our on-scene operations. So people that do call 911 for EMS service in the city and the county might not see as many people show up as in the past. And then we are beginning a practice where we send in what we would refer to as a scout provider to do an initial assessment. And all of that is designed to provide an appropriate level of care to the person who's called for help, but also to minimize the potential exposure to our providers and also husband our limited stocks of PPE. As we've said in previous episodes, and as people are no doubt aware of at this point, the primary mitigation strategy that we know is effective is simply social distancing. And I think we've seen positive trends in that direction. We monitor, in addition, our calls for service. We monitor social distancing scorecard, if you will, that looks at aggregated data from people's phones and other technology that are able to, not in an individually identified way, but identify where they're traveling and their general mobility. And we're seeing that trend in the right direction. We did see a spike last weekend, and hopefully we will not see that this weekend. And we're reminding people that the most important thing that they can do, particularly for those that are out providing those essential services, our firefighters, our EMTs and paramedics, our police officers, our social workers, human services workers, everybody who's out there trying to keep our infrastructure up and running. The most important thing our community can do is to simply stay at home unless they absolutely have to go out for an essential reason. So we are also monitoring our workforce very closely, and we're at about 90% today, if you count all of our first responders, police, fire, EMS in the city, the county, and the university. So I think that's a pretty good snapshot of what we're focused on today.
Thank you, Chief. For the listeners who may not know, Chief Baxter is the incident commander for the city of Charlottesville, and he is also our representative in the leadership of Unified Command at the Emergency Operations Center, where we are working with Albemarle County and the University of Virginia very closely. Chief, I know one of the coronavirus models we're watching, I believe it's from the University of Washington, indicates a peak in local cases which may come around May 20th. And obviously that's a date that's going to move around as the data gets better. The Virginia Department of Health, I think, is working on another model. But I wonder if you could just share, what does that date, 48 days in the future, mean to you, and what are the implications for the city?
Well, I think the date of June 10th, which is part of the governor's executive order 55, and then any of the modeling dates that you look at, and University of Washington's one that's often looked at. There's one from University of Pennsylvania that's coming out, and as you mentioned, VDH is developing one which we should see hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow. All of those, I think, send a message to the community and to those of us in public safety and public health that are in a planning and response mode, that this is a long-term campaign. I don't think there are probably too many people walking around who don't understand that yet, but sort of working backwards from those dates, it's very helpful for us in being able to understand the type of logistical supports that we're going to need in the long term. And this is for many people probably the longest operation that they've ever been a part of from a public safety perspective. And also from a local government perspective. We normally pivot to essential services within the context of a snowstorm or maybe an inland tropical storm effect from a hurricane. But that's a few days or maybe a week. But we're talking about months of being able to provide those essential services and being able to sustain our workforce throughout that. The other thing that we have to think about with that peak, and whichever model you look at, is the further out that peak is, the more time it gives our region and our state the opportunity to make sure that we have the hospital bed capacity and the ventilator capacity and the workforce capacity to absorb those patients. So the longer we can extend that curve out, the flatter that it is, the better it is from a planning perspective and from an overall health system capacity perspective.
And you mentioned the hospital beds, Chief, and on the last program I asked you about the availability of appropriate beds. And I wonder, has there been any significant change in status on that front, and is that an area of concern?
Yeah, I mean, I think for everyone that's following this, it's certainly an area of concern. We're okay right now. We haven't seen a significant uptick in the metrics that we look at regionally. That is something that the hospital regions plan for, and that is being coordinated on a state level. There was news published, I believe, yesterday or the day before from the University of Virginia announcing that they will be standing up additional bed capacity in the new expanded hospital area. That's good news. But it takes not just the space, it takes the bed, it takes the ventilators, it takes all the other equipment and all the other staff that are required to manage, particularly those complex, critically ill patients. And also never forgetting that the rest of life that happens that generates the need for EMS and fire and law enforcement and hospital capacity, that continues to happen, hopefully at a drawn down pace. I will tell you that looking at March EMS incidents in the city year over year, FY20 to FY19, we saw a 23% decrease in our EMS incident call load, which is good. that means there's less activity. That means there's fewer people using 911. And we hope to see that trend continue. And that will give us more space for the health systems to expand their capacity.
Thanks, Chief. If anyone listening on the webinar has a question for Chief Baxter before we let him go, please raise your hand now, or you can type the question into the Q&A module of the webinar. We do have one person who's raised their hand, and I'm going to bring John Hall into the conversation. Mr. Hall, you're on live with Chief Baxter. Go ahead with your question. You will need to unmute your microphone. There we go. John, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can.
Great. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Baxter,
Yes, sir.
how do you react to the need for first responders to have masks and have masks on especially when they encounter a person with cold or flu-like symptoms?
It's a very good question. So the first thing that we do is do an assessment from greater than 6 feet away, and that really drives the level of personal protective equipment that our crews will use. The next most important thing for our crews to do is to put a surgical mask on the patient, because that dramatically reduces our exposure and the exposure to anybody else in the room. And then we use our PPE, our N95s, our gowns, our goggles, and our gloves, and we go from there.
Thanks, Chief. Before we let you get back to work, is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, just again, I would just reiterate the point that people have been hearing from us on this show and from pretty much anybody else in a public safety setting or public health setting is the single most important thing that people can do is limit their exposure by staying home. So we understand that people do need to go out to the pharmacy or if they need groceries. We all understand that. But staying at home is the most important thing that people can do. I would also encourage people to stay connected, and those two things aren't mutually exclusive. So, call your neighbors, stay connected with your family. This is an ultra marathon. We started out saying this was a marathon, not a sprint. It's really an ultra marathon, and staying connected is really one of the most important things for all of us to be able to do throughout this process.
Thank you, Chief.
Absolutely.
And speaking of staying connected, I told my father in Asheville to tune in to this broadcast. So Larry Wheeler, if you're watching, hello, thank you for watching. We're going to move on now to the remainder of the program, which is going to focus on economic development and some of the support being offered by the city and other resource providers. And in the studio here, we have Chris Engel, the city's Director of Economic Development. And via webinar, we have Stephen Davis of the Community Investment Collaborative and City Councilor Lloyd Snook. I want to just remind folks that you can participate in the program by raising your hand on the webinar, and you can also type a question in the Q&A module. And we do hope you'll share this broadcast after the fact on social media, through Twitter and Facebook. We're getting a lot of views after the broadcast, and I think, as you saw from and heard from Chief Baxter, really important information that we can share with the community, and you can help us spread his advice for what we need to be doing now. So I'm going to start with Chris Engel, and I'll ask all three of our guests to initially just share some high-level observations to kick this off, and Chris, we'll start with you. Obviously, this is a challenge no one saw coming, and and I think it's a challenge few small businesses really can adequately prepare for. I've worked on the downtown mall area for 30 years, and you can tell this is a difficult time. So what are you seeing out there?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Brian. Glad to be here. I wish it was under different circumstances, but it's what we have. And just to set the context a little bit, it's a shock, obviously. This is unprecedented. It's difficult to comprehend how we arrived here in such a short time. We released the Office of Economic Development's annual report just 30 days ago, and the welcome letter to that report references an over 10-year plus expansion in this country in the economic environment. And obviously we've seen a shock to that. Here locally in Charlottesville, I referenced several figures which were records. We had the lowest unemployment rate in 15 years last month, and the highest number of jobs ever in the city of Charlottesville, nearly 42,000 jobs in the last 6 months as an average. We also saw average wage growth last year of 2.5% across all sectors and all levels of pay. We saw the highest level of commercial investment in the city ever, 145 million spread across a number of projects, several of which are large and significant, which we were seeing for the first time. Then, in early March, things started to change, and by March the 12th, we had a state declaration of emergency, followed by a city declaration of emergency, and a virtual halt to trade and commerce throughout the city, throughout the state, throughout the country. And as the chief referenced, this is unusual in that disasters are typically short-lived, days, maybe a week. And I think what's most unsettling for all of us in this situation is not knowing how long. 72 days is a long time, and it may or may not be that. But not knowing where the end is, it doesn't allow for people, business owners, to plan effectively, which is obviously causing a great deal of challenge. You referenced the downtown mall. Every business on the mall, for the most part, needs customers, and customers are being told not to come out, not to engage in the economy except for essential needs. And that's an absolute showstopper for businesses. Businesses need customers. Our economy is diverse, which is we are fortunate in that it is diverse. However, a good chunk of it, 30 to 40%, is driven by the consumer services. Mm-hmm. And when the consumer is told to stay home, that just cripples that entire component of our economy. So folks are suffering. Obviously, our phone has been ringing incessantly, and we're happy to answer it, and we are answering it. We're getting emails. We're hearing from folks in a lot of different ways. And they are struggling. Yep, that's for sure.
And you are one of those essential employees that's at City Hall every day. There's a small group of us there, so yes. we get to see each other occasionally. But there's not a lot of. It's a skeleton crew in City Hall. But we appreciate you answering the phone and helping these businesses. Mm-hmm. Speaking of helping businesses, let's bring Stephen Davis into the conversation. And Stephen, you're with the Community Investment Collaborative. Tell me what you're seeing among your partners and clients.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for having me on. I think just to echo a lot of what Chris is saying, CIC, our mission is helping under-resourced entrepreneurs. We are most of our clients are what you would call micro businesses, so the small of the small, under 5 or 10 employees, many self-employed individuals across a lot of different industries, but certainly some concentrations in food and catering and smaller restaurants and service businesses. They're all with a few exceptions, drastically being affected as far as customers who are out less, who are spending less in businesses because as they should be. They're staying home and kind of creating the social distance that we need. But that's really problematic because they're trying to. These business owners want to keep their employees paid. They want to keep their business running. They need to support their families, and it's an incredibly stressful time for a lot of folks to figure that out. That's kind of the heart of what we're seeing. Probably the only couple of exceptions we've seen are a few folks who have food products that sell in grocery stores. Folks are out, buying food for the home a lot more, and those kind of small number of kind of food product providers are holding steady. Still a struggle in some ways for them as well, but it's a little bit different. But for the most part, trying to keep their operation going, or in some cases having to put their businesses on hold.
And we're going to come back to both of you and get ideas about what the city is doing and what groups like CIC are doing. But let's switch to City Councilor Snook. Mr. Snook, you're a new member of City Council, and I'm wondering how you would characterize this experience you're going through as one of our local leaders and what you're seeing.
Well, it certainly was not what I was expecting during the campaign. We were, frankly, sort of almost taken by surprise, I suppose, in March, because although we had been seeing news reports of things happening in Washington State and in China and so on, the reality that it would come to Charlottesville, the reality that it would come to stay-at-home orders here hadn't really sort of sunk in until about, I'd say, we had a budget work session on March 12th and another public hearing on March 16th. And over that weekend, we began, I think all of us as individuals, began to sort of get hit by the fact that we'd been planning for a budget that no longer made sense. That we'd been planning for a budget where clearly our revenues, our tax revenues, were going to be down a great deal. And we needed to do some thinking about that. So we've been thinking about that. We've also been thinking about ways that we can help the people in Charlottesville, particularly the businesses in Charlottesville, make it so that this isn't so bad. Now, that's not to say it's not going to be bad. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, but there are ways that we can, I hope, make it less bad. For example, and this is what we saw coming out of the federal budget, the federal relief efforts that were passed last week. There is a great hope in this country that we were immediately thrown into a recession simply by so many people. We now saw, I guess, 6 million more people being filing for unemployment this week. That's a huge number. And so the hope is that we can have what's called a V recession, where we go down sharply, then we come up sharply, as opposed to what we saw in 2008, where a recession that went down and then kind of gradually came back up. And it was 5 years before we could get back to where we wanted to be. The hope is that we're going to have a V recession, that once this passes, we will all be able to do much better. And toward that end, of course, the federal government is now allocating $2 trillion, a huge infusion of cash, to try to keep people, for example, people who are losing their jobs because of the coronavirus and being told to stay home, that they don't have to wait a week, that they can get unemployment basically right away. That's an improvement over the usual situation. That they will get more than usual. That there will be a $1,200 check per person who makes less than $75,000 or $100,000 a year, whatever the figure is, that there would be an infusion of cash in an effort to make things work. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be a lot of pain in the next month or two. There will be. Hopefully we can do some things with these infusions of cash from the federal government in particular, can do some things to turn some of that around. There are some things that are already starting to happen at the local level. For example, and you should probably ask Chris Engel to talk a little bit about this, the Economic Development Agency here, Authority, has just allocated $350,000 of funds for loans and so on to help businesses through this difficult time. Some of the money from the federal government is going to start to come to us, to the state, and then to the city government. So, for example, we just got word today that there'd be about $265,000 of additional funds that would be coming through the CDBG process. And the question is, for what purposes and how soon could we allocate it and so on. But the point is that the authorities are trying to make money flow and trying to do some things to ease some of these burdens. At the city level, we've tried to be a little bit forgiving on some taxes and fees that we are not required by law to collect right now. Unfortunately for the restaurants, that does not apply to meals taxes, which we are required by law to get them to collect, and they're supposed to send on to us, although we will waive interest and penalties and so on if they're a little bit slow in getting it to us. So there's some things we can do, a lot more things we're being asked to do that we cannot do, however.
Thank you, Mr. Snook. And I think that's a great segue, Chris, to some of the initiatives you announced yesterday. There were business assistant initiatives that we put on the table, and maybe you could talk about how that happened and then share specifics about two of them, the Brace grants and the Go Hire grants.
Sure, I'd be happy to. First, I'd like to thank my team, the Office of Economic Development team, that is continuing to work hard to assist the business community. Most are working remotely. This is new and different for us. Brian and I see each other daily, but most of the rest of us are in and out. But all are continuing to do their work diligently to make the best of a difficult situation, for sure. Councilor Snook referenced the Charlottesville Economic Development Authority, and I want to give kudos to them. We had a virtual meeting on Tuesday, and they stepped up with some significant funding to help some existing programs that have been retooled to better address the current situation. The first of those is the Brace Grant, which stands for Building Resilience Among Charlottesville Entrepreneurs, which is a takeoff on our typical grant, which is called the ACE Grant, which is Advancing Charlottesville Entrepreneurs, which has been in place for 6-7 years now. But the Brace Grant is intended to be a micro grant. It's up to $2,000 maximum per business, focused on resiliency efforts, so businesses that are tweaking their business model to adapt to this situation, as well as we recognize fixed costs are certainly an issue. So there can be a combination of a resilience effort and some fixed costs in their application. Online applications, 100% online, quick turnarounds, and 7 to 10 days from when you submit your receipts, we will actually cut you a check and you will have your funds. That's the good news, and we allocated some funds towards that, and we are accepting applications. In the first 24 hours, we have over 100 applications.
Wow. And where do people go to learn about that and to apply?
So this is posted on our website. The press release went out yesterday that links folks to that. So you can go to the economic development page of the City of Charlottesville's website, and right at the top of our landing page, you'll see a link to that application. So we are overwhelmed at the moment in reviewing those and trying to process through those. We're hoping to help as many folks as we can and do so quickly. It's not going to be something that saves a business. It's intended to be something that could help along with other resources, of which there are many that we will get into. The other item that you mentioned is the Growing Opportunities Go Hire grant. This is another existing program that is intended to help folks hire a new employee and help with a wage subsidy for the first 8 weeks, or train some existing employees that need upskilling to increase their wages in the company. That's the typical use. We're going to retool that a little bit and allow companies to use it to retain an employee as well as hire an employee. The training component will still be available, although we expect most folks would tend to use it right now to retain an employee as well. So that'll be rolling out in the week after next, so the week of the 13th. We're tweaking that process now, and that'll be rolling out. That can also be paired with some of the federal programs that I'm sure we'll get into that we want to make sure folks are aware of, and that we are providing guidance and assistance to people as well.
Okay, great. We'll come back to that. Right now I want to bring in Stephen Davis again. And another of the initiatives we announced yesterday, Stephen, was the Business Equity Fund Resiliency Loan. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is one that's going to happen, and we're kind of pulling all the pieces together for that in the coming days, and to hopefully be able to launch next week. So the Business Equity Fund was created last year by City Council and then supplemented by the City Economic Development Authority, which is a microloan fund for socially disadvantaged business owners. We've been doing that loan fund for over a year and made about $26,000 in loans over that period of time. And those loans are all designed to be kind of long-term growth oriented for your business. But in the times we're right now, we're about helping people sustain and get through the tough period, hopefully keep employees on to the degree they can, have the capital they need to get through. And so the Economic Development Authority has kind of added to that fund, as well as the kind of available capital in the fund that already existed is being repurposed to create this resiliency fund for the Business Equity Fund. So it would be microloans of up to $5,000. the loans will be based on your. You need to. The one thing you need to have existed in 2019, so had a business license and been operating in the 2019. Obviously, be current on that license or renewed it if you had to, and then be able to demonstrate that before March 1, you had the capacity in your business, meaning the kind of sales and revenue, to make a loan payment, and then on a $5,000 loan, so about $225 a month. So if you can demonstrate that, then we will, kind of on a rolling first come first served basis, once it opens, approve those loans of up to $5,000.
Great.
And those are designed to fill the need of payroll, rent, any of the working capital you need in the short term to provide some relief to your business, especially as many of them are taking big hits to their revenue, at least between now and hopefully not much longer than June 12th, but that's where we are now.
And we'll put that link back up on the screen again. The economic development page on the city's website has information about all three of those programs. I want to go back to Mr. Snook. And I think, one of the things I'm hearing is that the city and our partners, we've been able to be pretty nimble and put a program together quickly, start taking applications and helping people. I think, maybe Mr. Snook, you could talk about the expectations of the timing of federal money helping small businesses and what are we seeing on that front?
Well, the first thing we're seeing is that the feds are trying, I think, to roll out as much money as fast as they can. So, for example, the bills, there were a couple of bills that were passed and signed just last week, just Thursday and Friday, that talk about literally trillions of dollars to be coming. And some of it is to be spent almost right away. Some of it, for example, the $1,200 checks I referred to earlier, are likely to come in the next week, in the next month to 2 months. Some of it may depend on whether the federal government already has your bank depository information. For example, if you had gotten a refund before and had it direct deposited to a bank account, they will already know and they will send that money to that account, some things like that. So some of that money will start to hit very quickly. Some of the money will start to hit a little more slowly, but nonetheless fast enough to be able to make a real difference in some people's lives. For example, the improvement on the unemployment compensation benefits. Number one, I mentioned earlier that you would no longer have the 1 week waiting period. That was by state law. That Governor Northam waived that. But there's also going to be a bump provided from the feds in terms of how much of your prior salary or your prior wages you're able to collect. Also, there will be an increase to a lot of folks who were not previously going to be eligible for that kind of unemployment compensation because they were so-called gig workers or people who were working restaurant jobs where they may be making a lot of money in tips that may be hard to document. I am told that the feds will be substantial and that the unemployment people generally will be much easier to deal with in some respects there, so that hopefully that will help. The one thing I wanted to ask, and perhaps Chris, you may be able to help us on this, is there are going to be funds available, some loans available to small businesses in particular who promise to keep their people on salary, to keep them employed, and those loans get forgiven over time if in fact you keep them on staff and being paid. I've never seen something like that before. I don't know whether you're familiar with it or whether you're just like I am, you're trying to read the press releases and figure out what the heck is this actually going to mean. But it sounds like the sort of thing that could be of a great deal of assistance to a lot of people in Charlottesville.
Yes, that's a good segue to the two items that are from the federal government that I wanted to mention and be sure folks are aware of. And the program you're referring to is the Paycheck Protection Program. It's brand new. It's never been done before. But it is it is structured as a loan, so you fill out paperwork as if you're getting a loan, but it is 100% forgivable provided you keep the employees on payroll for the duration of the period, which is, I think, at least 8 weeks. It's a brand new program. The kinks are being worked out. It is federally funded. However, it is one of the SBA products whereby you go through a local bank. So you go through a community lender that is certified as a SBA lender. Typically, whoever you have your relationship with, most are certified, not all. They are quickly trying to work out how this is actually going to happen. As you referenced, much of this happened rapidly and has no real roadmap. So everybody's scrambling to figure it out. But the program has been announced. Folks can access 2.5 times their monthly payroll. There are no payments for 6 to 12 months, and once again, it's 100% forgivable provided they stick within the guidelines. And that is intended to do what you referenced, Councilor Snook, and keep people on the payroll for the period of time that is thought to be the most challenging time here. So Paycheck Protection Program, lots more coming out. It's a direct application to an existing community bank. No need to call SBA on that. No need to call us on that. Talk to your local banker. The other item that I want to make sure folks know about is called the EIDL loan, and that's Economic Injury Disaster Loan. That's an SBA product whereby you apply directly online to the SBA and they issue the loan. It is a loan. Up to $2 million per business, 3.7% on the interest, up to 30 years. It is not forgivable. However, there is a piece of this, up to $10,000, that is a grant. And anybody who fills out the application, regardless of whether they actually go through with the loan or not, is eligible for, in a very short turnaround, $10,000. So we are encouraging all small businesses, all businesses that qualify, and most will, to make that application. We're anxious to hear of a successful applicant who has received a turnaround, and we've got feelers out for that. This was just started earlier this week, and we know people are applying. We encourage people to apply. I do want to share one resource, that web resource that is, there are many out there, and lots of folks are getting bombarded with information, but one that we are continuing to use, and Stephen will know this one. It's the Virginia SBDC website, and that's virginiasbdc.org/COVID. And that is a collection of resources. The SBDC network is kind of an interface to the Small Business Administration at the federal level, but they're on the ground here. CIC and the local Charlottesville, Central Virginia SBDC are co-located now and are working together on all of these efforts. So would encourage folks to check that website. It has links to both of these programs, and we are able to provide guidance to folks as well.
Stephen, anything you want to add on that one front?
Yeah, so we're the host for the Central Virginia Small Business Development Center, which is our local SBDC. And the SBDC is available to all small business owners who need help in figuring out how to access these programs and, work on compiling information related to your application and that type of stuff and answering questions. So, please visit the website at cvsbdc.org for Central Virginia SBDC to reach out and schedule a time to get that counseling if you need it for any of these programs, or kind of backing up from a larger perspective, if you need help thinking about plans for your business now and into the future. We do free one-on-one counseling and technical assistance, and that is a resource available to all local businesses. So reach out if we can be helpful in the short term on these programs, or in the long term on thinking about how to position your business for the future.
Great. And I want to encourage our audience, if you have a question, please raise your hand by clicking that icon in the webinar, or you can type your question and I'll ask it of our guest. You can do that in the Q&A module. And we've got some hands coming up, but while we wait on those to see who else raises their hand, just wanted to talk with Chris here. And, the meeting that you had with the Economic Development Authority, that wasn't a straightforward proposition in and of itself, just to convene that group. And so I think it's important to just reflect on the fact that even Councilor Snook, getting a city council meeting to happen right now has to be really focused on things related to continuity of government and emergency operations. So that could potentially stymie, local government on other fronts. But I'm glad you were able to move forward and tell us about that process. What did you do?
Well, it's unprecedented. The EDA has never met telephonically, and we did that for the first time Tuesday based on the emergency declaration that's in place and the ordinance that council passed a week prior to allow boards and commissions to meet based on the emergency. So the EDA members are a good group of business, real estate, finance folks. They understand the situation and are tuned into it and wanted to be supportive. So gathering them once we had the green light to be able to do that was fairly easy, and the staff had worked in advance of that to prepare some items for them to be able to react to, and they were supportive, which we were grateful of.
That's great. So we've got a question from John Hall, and Mr. Hall, I've unmuted your microphone. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, Brian. Mr. Engel, do you
Yep.
hear me?
Yes, sir.
I've been unemployed for some time. I was wondering if I could get a grant.
Well, the particular program that we just referenced, which is the Brace Grant, is for businesses. So if you had a business that would like to apply, you may. It's not intended for individuals or nonprofits. Councilor Snook referenced earlier the unemployment benefits that are available, that are always available, but have now been enhanced. The dollar amount is enhanced. The ease of access has been increased, and the duration of the benefits have been extended. So there are some benefits there for folks who are already unemployed, and would encourage you to pursue that avenue.
Another number we'll put up on the screen is the community resource line, and that is something, Mr. Hall, that's certainly available to all of our residents and is a great place to tap into some other funding sources that are helping people who are in desperate need right now for assistance. So we would encourage people to share this telephone number, which is 434-234-4490. I want to circle back to Councilor Snook. And Mr. Snook, maybe you could talk about sort of the position City Council's in right now when it comes to the budget. You talked about some of the challenges as we have to reforecast revenues and things like that. So it has an economic impact on the city when our businesses are impacted. But tell us where we are.
Well, for this fiscal year, the fiscal year that will end June 30th, current expectations are that we'll be okay. I'm not to say we're not going to be great, but we'll be okay. By that I mean our revenue projections up until the 1st of March had been coming in somewhat ahead of expectations. And so if we figure, we're basically figuring we're going to be down overall perhaps about $1.2 million, and we have reserves set aside for exactly this purpose to be able to cover that kind of deficit. The challenge is for the coming year, for the fiscal year 2020 to 2021, beginning July 1st. We get about $1.6 million a month in lodging taxes and meals taxes. So when the tourist business is down, when the business of the University of Virginia is down, in the last month or so, that has been basically been down 75-80%. So the tax revenue from that's down tremendously. We have been working up budget calculations that would say, okay, what would happen if our tax revenues were down $5 million? What would happen if they were down $7 million? And we've not yet had a full presentation on that by city manager staff to council, and therefore have not yet had any public discussion of it. I want people to understand really two things. First is that we understand that this is a belt-tightening time and it is not going to be a tax-raising time. I say that wanting to preface all my comments with, I'm speaking for myself and not for City Council, but there has not been any great sentiment on the part of City Council for raising the tax rate. Technically, we would have to set it by April 14th in order to be able to go ahead and send out tax notices and so on. I think I can say that there is no interest on councils, on any individual councilor's part or council as a whole in raising taxes. So we will be finding ways to tighten our belt. and the belt, it may mean that there are some projects that we were hoping to launch in this coming fiscal year that aren't going to get launched, or that we're hoping to expand that weren't going to get expanded. We'll have to see how that works out, and I'm not going to try to sort of prejudge what that might be. I will tell you also, one of the things we have to factor into our thinking is that there were a number of initiatives that went through the General Assembly that were likely to increase some local costs, and we don't know fully what all of those are yet. And more importantly, I know that there will be an effort in the veto session to try to get some of those items that amount to unfunded mandates from the state, to get some of those removed from the state budget, or from the state code, so that they don't have adverse effects on our budget. Suffice it to say, we're looking at everything. We have reasonable confidence that we will be able to make changes and reductions in things to get us to the point where we're getting by okay. We're not going to be rolling in a lot of money, but we'll get by okay. We will tighten our belts. We will be aware of the fact that many people in Charlottesville are hurting economically. We're going to try to see what we can do to help in some of those respects. In many cases, some of the things that Chris Engel has talked about may help some. Some of the federal money that will come will help some. Our best hope has to be that this whole episode gets over as soon as possible. And the way that it gets over as soon as possible is for people to stay home, for people to do what you've been told by Chief Baxter, by the governor, by other people. Stay home. Let's get this thing over with as soon as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Snook. And Chief Baxter is still on the call, and he was nodding his head as you were reminding folks of that. Another question we just got from our audience: has there been any conversation among city leadership about rent relief? And I don't know if anybody, Mr. Snook or Mr. Engel, would have any knowledge about that one.
In what context?
Might need some more information, Alex, on your question.
If I can, Brian?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, two things. First of all, we have zero authority over private rent relief. So if you've got a problem with your private landlord, Charlottesville as a city has no authority to do anything. We have already sent a letter to 1,700 landlords in Charlottesville asking them to be lenient, to be tolerant, and to remind them that even if they wanted to evict you, they can't anyway because the courts are closed. So if they can't do anything quickly anyway, they may as well be lenient and tolerant and give you a chance to make up the rent. We don't have the authority legally to do anything more than that with private rent. Now, the second question has been raised about what do we do with CRHA, for example, rents that are due to the housing authority. That is a difficult question for council to answer, in part because council isn't actually in charge. It's the CRHA board that is in charge, though obviously we have a lot of influence over the CRHA board. Their problem is that they've got a budget to meet also. Everybody in this situation has a budget to meet. It's not like we're sitting on a big pot of money somehow where everybody can just decide we're going to forgive rent. But again, it's a situation where there may be tolerance, where there may be some patience, and that may be what's going to get everybody through this. It's not going to be that one piece of the equation, that one side of things, everybody on that side has to sacrifice for the benefit of another group of people. All of us are going to have to sacrifice some, and that's just the reality of the situation.
Thank you, Mr. Snook. This question's for Chief Baxter, and it relates to, the question is, are we potentially or eventually looking at a mandatory quarantine or curfew for the city, if not the state? And let me bring Chief Baxter back to address that question. Go ahead, Chief.
These are unprecedented circumstances. So, and I'm not an attorney, but I wouldn't take anything off the table at this point. I don't see that in the current trajectory at all. If we keep doing what we talked about earlier and what Councilor Snook just referenced, and keep doing all the behaviors that we know, we'll continue to flatten that curve, then that puts us in the right path, and I wouldn't see the need for any particularly more restrictive actions on the part of a locality or of the state. It is, however, important for people to remember, I don't want to be doom and gloom, but we don't know yet what the end of this period of time that we've decided, as a community, as a state, as a nation, what that will bring. We're looking at what's happened around the world. We're looking at what happened in Washington State, which was sort of an early arbiter for us of what worked from a public safety perspective, from a public health perspective. But there's many more unknowns about this particular virus, and than there are knowns at this point. But again, going back to what we keep sort of harping on and reinforcing is that we do know definitively that the less human-to-human contact there is, that's the best way to sort of snuff out the transmissibility of this virus. Think about what we knew 30 days ago and what we know now, and then project forward 30 days and 60 days and 90 days. But so to answer the question, I don't know, but I would not take anything off the table at this point.
And Mr. Gathers made a follow-up comment about the renting situation, and that, renters have a budget to meet as well. And so I think if we could put up the community resource line again, Don Gathers, I think that is the place we need to drive people who need that sort of immediate assistance. April 1st, people had to pay rent, and this is one resource line that people can access and try to request assistance before the federal money comes that Mr. Snook mentioned. I want to go to Chris Engel and try to end on this segment on a couple positive notes. One, when that money does come from the federal government, what are some ways we can use it to support local restaurants? Can you tell us about any initiatives
Well,
there?
I thought you never asked, Brian. I'm not wearing a hat because it's cold or rainy in here. I'm wearing a hat because this week is Virginia's for Restaurant Lovers Takeout Week. And the hat is a reference to Virginia's for Restaurant Lovers, which is a campaign run by the Virginia Tourism Corporation, started last year, which is, of course, a takeoff on the campaign that has been going in Virginia for over 30 years, that Virginia's for Lovers. So you can absolutely, and we have been encouraging folks to do this, support your local restaurants that do remain open, and there are several, many actually, that are open for carryout. And our family has taken advantage of this a couple of times, and would encourage everybody to do that. You can also buy gift cards. That's helpful too. It gives the business some cash now, and it gives you the ability to cash in at a later date. But yeah, the whole week through April 5th is Takeout Week across the state. The governor was promoting this with a T-shirt the other day. I'm wearing the hat today, and would encourage everybody to take a look at this and go visit your local restaurant. These are run by people that live in your neighborhood and work at these restaurants, so they need help as well. Given that we're kind of on a lockdown situation, most people's menu abilities are limited, and you're going to need some different ideas from time to time. So please do that. In that vein, folks, we helped with some designated parking spots, grab-and-go signage that was helpful to a lot of these restaurants that are in the downtown area that have challenges with drive-up parking. Over 20 of those signs are put out and are out there now, so the ease of access for picking up these items has been eliminated.
I think that's a good point. Call your favorite restaurants and ask them if they can do that sort of pickup or delivery, and figure out ways you can keep them in business.
There's a great resource. It's Charlottesville29.com that's been put up that has restaurants that are currently open and presumably doing takeout. So would encourage folks to go to that, www.charlottesville29.com. As another resource.
And the last thing I want to ask you to close on is any business adaptations that you've come across where somebody's done something innovative to pivot what they're working on?
Sure, there are a number, and it's interesting at times like these, create opportunities for people to be creative, and we are seeing that in the city. And I'll share just a few. You may have seen this was featured in the newspaper this week, but Osh Shoes is a local company that creates shoes using 3D printers, and they have pivoted to use their 3D printers to create a plastic mask. And they are partnering with their neighbor, Luna Innovations, to actually finish the mask and create the wiring that connects it to folks. Indoor Biotechnologies is another local biotech company, is creating proteins used in testing kits. And just another way to adapt their business in addition to what they're already doing. Cardboard Safari is a local company that makes products out of cardboard and balsa wood, and they are pivoting to make and cut plastic face shields in conjunction with another Virginia company that's going to finish the product. We've talked a bit about restaurants. Bodo's is a local restaurant, local bagel shop that's been around for 30 plus years, and they've reopened their drive-thrus magically, and they're seeing quite a bit of business. So they had closed those as they needed employee parking.
Actually, I've got some experience with that one. They were never open.
There you go.
The drive-thrus were never open at Bodo's. So
first time ever.
This is an important pivot that they've just made. Well, thank you for those positive notes, Chris.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone, for watching this episode of Cville360. Our next show will be on Tuesday, April 7th at 11 a.m., and we will focus on the public safety issues around the coronavirus. We'll be joined by Police Chief Rochelle Brackney and the city's Commonwealth Attorney, Joe Botania. Please contact me with feedback and future ideas for both topics and guests. Thank you for watching, and please stay healthy.